The crystal chandeliers gleamed above the banquet hall, casting a golden shimmer over champagne glasses and pearl-draped guests. The annual Cole Foundation Gala had begun like any other, sterile, elegant, efficient. Just how Henry liked it. He didn't notice Alina at first. Why would he? She was staff. One of the dozens of anonymous faces dressed in black and white, weaving between tables with polished silence. But something changed when she approached his table with a tray of wine. She didn't look at him. Not once, most staff at least offered. A neutral nod. Alina kept her eyes downcast, her hands trembling just slightly as she placed the glass beside his plate. The wine nearly spilled. And when he glanced up, ready to reprimand her, she was already gone. Night. As the gala wound down and guests stumbled to waiting cars, Henry lingered near the entrance. He watched her. Alina emerge from the back exit alone, still in uniform. Rain threatened above the marble steps. His driver leaned in. "Sir, shall I offer her a ride?" Henry hesitated. "No, let's see what she does." They waited. Alina declined a co-worker's umbrella with a polite nod, then disappeared down a side alley toward the bus stop, the city swallowing her silhouette. Why would a maid turn down a free ride in a storm? Something gnawed at him. It wasn't attraction, it was offness. She didn't move like other housekeepers. She held herself like someone pretending to be small, the way she folded her apron. A slight limp in her step, carefully masked. Like someone used to mourn. By the next morning, he had her name, Alina Mikhailov. No social presence. No references before working for his estate. A resume looked too clean, almost printed, not lived in. And yet there had been no red flags in the background check. Nothing, and that was the problem. Even ghosts leave traces. That evening he watched her clock out again, same path, same pace. But this time he followed. He told himself it was curiosity, due diligence. Nothing more. The rain began softly as he trailed her through the narrow back streets of Midtown, her figure weaving in and out of street lamp halos like a memory he hadn't yet placed. She didn't look back once. 10 minutes. Then 20. When she finally stopped. She stood outside a place that made no sense, a broken-down brick building with a rusted sign. St. Agnes Elder Care. Flickering neon. One working light. She disappeared. Inside. Henry waited. And when he finally crept to the window and peeked through the smudged glass, what he saw made him freeze. Alina wasn't cleaning, she was changing into scrubs. Tight bun, gloves, clipboard. Then she smiled at an elderly man and checked his pulse like she'd done it 1,000 times. She looked different, confident, capable, respected. Henry leaned back into the rain, unsettled. This wasn't a maid. This was someone pretending to be one. Asterisk, the drizzle had turned to full rain by the time Henry stepped out of the shadows. He lingered across the street, his tailored coat soaked through, water pooling in the cuffs of his sleeves. The neighborhood was far from the one his chauffeur usually drove through. This part of the city had peeling paint, rusted balconies, and windows covered with yellowing newspaper. He adjusted the collar of his coat and stared up at the building. St. Agnes Elder Care. The flickering neon still buzzed weakly above the door. He crossed the street. A narrow alley led to the side of the building. He moved slowly, careful to avoid broken glass and slick puddles. Near a fogged window, he wiped a patch of condensation away with his glove and looked inside. There she was. Alina stood beside an elderly man in a reclined wheelchair, gently spoon-feeding him soup. Her black and white maid uniform was gone, replaced with scrubs. Her hair, normally tied tight under her housekeeping cap, now flowed in a neat braid down her back. She moved with an efficiency that startled him. Clipboard under one arm, latex gloves on. Her posture sharp. She didn't just look competent, she looked in charge. Behind her, 2 other staff, both clearly junior, followed her gestures, nodding as she gave instructions. One of them dropped a vial. Alina didn't flinch. She simply knelt, picked it up, and calmly said something that made them both nod again. Henry blinked, then stepped back from the window. The rain ran cold down the back of his neck, but he barely felt it. He had assumed she was poor, desperate, meek, but now, watching her there, something twisted inside him. He felt studied as if he had been the one misread. Just then, the building side door creaked open. Henry ducked behind a dumpster. A nurse exited, holding a cigarette in one hand and a phone in the other. She muttered something in Russian, then dialed. Henry heard only fragments. Dr. Mikhailov. Can't do double shifts forever. We need real help. Dub Mikhailov. Henry's breath caught. Back at his mansion, he had read Alina's job application. She had listed no formal education, claimed to have worked as a domestic in 3 different households. There was no mention of medicine. No suggestion of leadership. And certainly not of being called doctor. He waited for the nurse to finish and go back inside. Then, after one last glance at the window, he turned and walked briskly to his car. The questions in his mind were no longer idle curiosity. They had sharp edges now. Why would a doctor take a maid's job? Why lie to him? By the time he reached the penthouse, Henry was shivering. He poured himself a drink and sat at the edge of his bed, laptop open. A search bar stared back at him. He hesitated. Then he typed, Alina Mikhailov plus Hospital plus Ukraine. It took just seconds before the first article loaded. Her face was in the photo, younger, smiling. The headline read, Renowned trauma surgeon missing after bombing of Kharkiv Central. Henry stared at the screen. Everything he thought he knew about her had just shattered, and somehow she had ended up scrubbing his floors. The photograph stared back at him, grainy, yellowed with time, but unmistakable. Henry leaned forward, elbows digging into the granite countertop of his private study. The screen glowed in the dark room, illuminating his face, which was now pale with disbelief. There she was, Alina Mikhailov, not in a maid's apron, not hunched over his espresso machine or folding his silk ties. In the photo, she stood tall, in a lab coat outside a shattered hospital. Kharkiv Central, her arms crossed, her name badge clipped with quiet authority. Behind her, smoke curled upward from a crater in the ground. She was surrounded by wounded civilians and frantic nurses. Yet she stood calmly, as if defying the chaos. The article was dated March 16, 2022. Dr. Alina Mikhailov, Chief Trauma Surgeon at Kharkiv Central, was last seen during the second shelling of the facility. Her whereabouts remain unknown. Henry clicked deeper, now scrolling through Ukrainian news archives, switching tabs between translations and satellite-dodging blog posts. Another image showed Alina at a medical conference in Geneva a year prior, standing beside a panel of doctors. The caption called her one of the rising figures in conflict-zone trauma medicine. What the hell was she doing washing his wine glasses? His phone buzzed beside him. A message from Ava. Did you sign off on the Zurich transfer yet? He ignored it. Instead, Henry rose, crossed the room, and opened the drawer where he kept his domestic staff applications, neatly filed, scanned, and sorted. He pulled out Alina's fake references. No listed education. No passport copy, just an address in Brighton Beach, and a phone number that rang into voicemail every time. He'd tried it. She had slipped into his house like mist under a door. He felt exposed. Violated. But also something colder, shame, admiration. He couldn't name it. Earlier that day, he had seen her at the care home, adjusting a patient's the fourth with the kind of confidence no maid would possess. She had given an order to a much younger man in scrubs, who obeyed immediately. Not deferentially professionally, he had assumed she scrubbed toilets because she had no options. He had built a company off instincts, off reading people. And somehow he had misread the woman beneath his own roof. He clicked open another article. Dr. Mikhailov was instrumental in saving over 300 lives in the Eastern Conflict Corridor. Known for operating under fire, she once performed a chest surgery in a collapsed metro station using salvaged tools. Her disappearance has left a void in Ukraine's medical defense. Henry stood abruptly. He had to know more, not out of concern. Not yet. Something else, closer to obsession. He drove himself this time. No driver, no cameras. Just a baseball cap and tinted windows. He returned to the care home, parked across the street, and watched. At 7:13 p.m., Alina emerged in scrubs, hair tied back, her face tired but composed. She looked like someone rebuilding her, Life from Ash. She didn't look at his car, didn't glance around, but Henry, for the first time in years, didn't feel like a man in control. He felt like a man watching the center of gravity shift without him. Asterisk, the sound came first, deafening. Like the sky itself had cracked in half. Alina didn't flinch. She was already moving. The hospital lights flickered, then went out. The backup generators kicked in with a low mechanical groan as dust drifted down from the ceiling tiles. She held her son tighter. Misha was only 5. He clung to her waist. Confused but quiet, too used to this routine. They had practiced it. If sirens scream, hold Mama's hand. Don't cry. Don't talk. Don't stop. A second blast. This one closer. She could feel it in her teeth. Downstairs. She shouted in Ukrainian to a nurse scrambling across the hallway. Move the ICU babies first. The hospital's underground shelter wasn't built for this kind of war. They'd reinforced it with plastic sheets, sandbags, and prayer. She knelt to strap Misha into a canvas sling against her back. Mama, he whispered. She kissed the top of his head. Almost safe. Another sound, not a blast shouting from outside. Military voices, footsteps, gunfire too close. She didn't look back. Through the smoke-filled corridor, she led a line of patients down cracked steps, some on gurneys, some stumbling. All of them terrified. In the chaos, a call came through her radio. Alina, the west stairwells collapsed. No time, no other way out. She turned to face the ones still behind her. Split. Triage east, she ordered. Take who you can. I'll go through radiology. She ran, boots slipping on debris. Misha silent against her back. Past broken windows. Past shattered glass and pools of blood, through radiology. Around the bend. And then dash fire. Not from the sky this time. From inside, a ruptured oxygen line. A spark, a wall of flame roaring up in seconds. Alina screamed, but not from fear, from pain. Her lungs burned. She dropped to the floor, shielding Misha as best she could. She made it to the fire door. Kicked it open, outside. Snow fell sideways in ash-heavy gusts. She made it 2 blocks, then she collapsed. When she woke up in another hospital 2 days later, her right hand was bandaged, her legs blistered, her back torn, and her son was gone. She never saw his body. They told her he was likely carried away during the second evacuation, or trampled, or buried. There was no certainty, only silence. Weeks passed. A journalist contacted her. Asked why she had survived while others hadn't. Suggested a government scapegoat theory. Then came the threats. They knew where she lived. They knew she had access to military medical files. They knew what she'd seen. So she did what only the grieving and hunted do. She disappeared, used a dead cousin's visa paperwork, traded her degrees for silence, moved to a place where no one asked what kind of blood she had washed from her hands. America. A Brooklyn basement. A forged name, Alina Mikhailov, became Alina M. Doctor became Maid. The first home she worked in threw out her soup because it smelled foreign. The second asked if she'd been trafficked. The third, the coal estate, paid well and said nothing. She took it. Not because it was easier, but because no one would ask who she was beneath the gloves, and that was exactly what she needed. Asterisk, the locker was old. Rust flaked off the corners. Its lock, flimsy, more ceremonial than secure. Henry waited until Alina was in the east wing. He'd memorized the staff rotation schedule over the past 2 nights. She would be occupied for exactly 12 minutes. That was enough. He slipped gloves on. Opened the locker. Inside. It smelled faintly of lavender and antiseptic. A small canvas bag rested on the shelf, worn but clean. Beneath it, a stack of envelopes bundled by an elastic band, folders, photos. And then a small black USB stick taped to the back panel. It had one word written on a yellow label in faded ink. Marina. Henry froze. He stared at the name, his late wife's name, as if it would vanish if he blinked too hard, but it did in single quotes. His pulse quickened. He yanked the stick off and shoved it into his coat pocket. Then, hands shaking, he returned to the other items. The envelopes were immigration forms, legal documents in Cyrillic, old medical licenses. One folder contained photos, dozens of them showing Alina in scrubs beside wounded children. Some were dated 2014, others 2018. All bore the same hospital name in Ukraine, but another folder caught his eye, thinner, labeled only intake. Inside were scans of hospital admission papers from New York, names redacted, but a familiar signature. Looped at the bottom of one, Marina Cole, the date? 6 months before Marina's accidental fall. He sank to the floor. 6 months before his wife died. She was seeing Alina? Why? Why would Marina go to a maid, no, a surgeon for help? And why the secrecy? Henry flipped through more papers. A bruising diagram, an outline of cracked ribs. Notes. In Alina's handwriting, patient fearful. Refuses, suspects surveillance. Possible domestic coercion. Domestic coercion? His hand recoiled like it had been burned. Was Alina accusing him? He stuffed the folder back, slamming the locker shut just as footsteps echoed down the hall. He straightened. Took one long breath, smoothed his collar. It couldn't be true. Marina never mentioned bruises, never said a word. They argued, yes. He raised his voice, sure. But he never. The sound of the care home microwave dinged in the background, jarring him. Alina appeared at the end of the hall, smiling at a resident in a wheelchair. She hadn't seen him yet. Henry turned and walked out through the side exit, the USB drive digging into his pocket. Back in his car, he stared out the windshield, rain streaking down the glass like tiny blades. If the files were real, if Marina had sought help and he never noticed, then what did that make him? And what did Alina know that he didn't? One thing was clear, this wasn't just about a maid anymore. Henry waited until Alina's shift was over. She stepped out into the cool night, buttoning her coat against the wind. Her posture was graceful but guarded, the kind of tired dignity that didn't want pity. As she turned toward the sidewalk, Henry stepped from the shadows. We need to talk, he said. Her body froze. Then slowly she turned. I know what's on the USB, he continued. And I know you treated Marina. Alina's face didn't change, but something behind her eyes shifted like a door she'd held shut for too long had creaked open just a little. She said nothing. I want answers, Henry demanded. Why was my wife seeing you? Why the secrets? Still. Silence. Say something, he barked, louder than intended. You think I hurt her? Is that what this is? Alina inhaled deeply, then finally spoke. Your wife came to me 3 times, quietly, at night, always with a scarf. Even in July. Henry flinched. She said she couldn't go to a hospital. She was afraid someone might recognize her, Alina continued. But she was more afraid you'd find out. That's not true, he snapped. Marina and I argued, sure, but she had bruises on her ribs, Mr. Cole, old fractures healing wrong. A hairline fracture on her wrist. Henry's voice trembled. No, I would have noticed. She would have told me of something. Would she? Alina's tone wasn't cruel. It was tired, honest. Some women swallow pain the way. Others swallow pride. And some men never hear anything they don't want to. He stepped back like she'd slapped him. Alina opened her bag and retrieved a folded page 1 of the medical notes. This is from her last visit, 2 weeks before her death. Henry scanned the page. His name was there, again, in Marina's handwriting. He'll say I'm being dramatic, but I'm scared. I want to disappear. His throat tightened. He stared at the page, blinking hard. I never laid a hand on her, he muttered. I raised my voice, yes, I said things I regret. But I never... Alina interrupted gently. Intentions don't erase consequences. Silence protects no one. He dropped the note, suddenly breathless. Why didn't you come to me, to anyone? Because she begged me not to, Alina whispered. Because she feared that truth wouldn't set her free, it would bury her faster. A gust of wind rattled the leaves around them. Henry leaned against a lamppost, stunned. The marble certainty he'd built around his past was cracking. He always thought he was in control, that Marina was the fragile one. But maybe she was just surviving him. I didn't know, he murmured, more to himself than to her. I didn't... No, Alina folded the note and tucked it back into her coat. Now you do. She began to walk away. Wait, he called. Is that why you're here, working as a maid? Hiding? Alina turned back. Her voice was low, but steady. I wasn't hiding, I was watching. For years I tried to forget. But when I saw your name on the employment roster, I remembered what she whispered that last night. What? Henry asked. Alina's eyes didn't blink. She said, if anything happens to me, promise you'll never let him sleep soundly. Again, the apartment was silent except for the faint hum of the dishwasher. Henry sat across from Alina at the kitchen table, hands clasped tightly, as if holding himself together. The lights were low, not for ambience, but because anything brighter felt too exposing. Alina placed her phone on the table and slid it across to him. Play it, she said softly. He hesitated, then pressed the screen. The voice that came through was unmistakable Marina, softer than he remembered. Frayed, exhausted, if anything happens to me. Henry won't be the one to uncover it. But you will, Alina. You already know where to look. The message ended. Henry's chest tightened. He felt like he'd just stepped off a cliff with no ground below. What does that mean? He asked. What did she mean, where to look? Alina looked at him, not with anger, but with quiet disappointment. She meant your truth wasn't hers, and that one day someone else would dig up what she wasn't allowed to say. Henry's mind began to race. The night Marina fell down the stairs, was it really just a fall? Or had she been running from something? He remembered the bruises she hid under silk scarves, the way she flinched when voices were raised. And the silence, always the silence afterward. I told myself she was moody, he murmured. That she was ... fragile? She wasn't fragile. Alina replied. She was cornered. He stood abruptly, walking to the sink, gripping its edge. I didn't kill her, he said aloud, almost begging the walls to confirm it. I swear to God I didn't. I didn't say you did. Alina said. But maybe you built a world where she could vanish, and no one would ask questions. That cut deeper than accusation. He turned back to her, eyes glossy. You don't understand. I gave her everything, the penthouse, the car, the fund. In her name, but not safety, Alina said quietly. Not a voice. Silence fell again. The dishwasher beeped softly. Henry stared at his reflection in the kitchen window, but all he saw was a stranger with guilt pressed into every wrinkle. I need to know everything, he whispered. If there's anything she left behind, I need to know. Alina studied him. Not with forgiveness, but with consideration. Then she nodded slowly. There's one more place, she said. Somewhere only she and I ever went. Where? He asked, desperate. Alina rose and picked up her coat. Come with me. He grabbed his keys without hesitation. As they stepped out into the night, Marina's voice lingered in his ears, not the recording, but the memory of her last words before she left for that final walk down the stairs. I just want a moment where I don't feel afraid in my own home. He had laughed then. A cold, careless laugh. Now. It echoed back as something else entirely evident. The doorbell rang just as dawn painted the sky with gray and pale gold. Henry hadn't slept. He'd been pacing the cold marble floor of his foyer, trying to make sense of the storm Marina had left behind. When he opened the door, he expected Alina. Instead, it was a stranger in a dark gray suit, briefcase in hand. Mr. Cole? The man asked. Yes, Henry said cautiously. I'm Russell Halley, family law. I represent the estate of Marina Cole. Henry blinked. She had a lawyer? Russell gave a curt nod. More than that. She had foresight. He stepped inside, without waiting to be invited. The briefcase clicked open on the foyer console. Russell retrieved a manila envelope, thick and weathered. This was entrusted to Dr. Alina Mikhailov before your wife's death. She was instructed to deliver it only when certain conditions were met. Henry frowned. What conditions? Russell didn't answer directly. He opened the envelope instead and slid out 2 documents. The first, a sealed handwritten letter addressed in Marina's delicate script, to be read only by Henry Cole. The second, a notarized custody file. Henry's breath caught when he saw his own name stamped across it in bold legal ink. Russell tapped the second file. This is a statement Marina prepared. It names you as legally unfit to retain sole custody. In the event she gave birth, the words landed like ice. She was pregnant? Henry whispered. She was, Russell confirmed. You didn't know? Henry shook his head. She never told me. Russell regarded him with a gaze somewhere between disbelief and pity. She tried. According to the records, you weren't listening. Henry slowly opened the sealed letter, his hands trembling. Marina's voice rose from the page like wind through a grave. Henry, I begged for peace and you gave me silence. I asked for warmth and you gave me distance. But what I never asked for was your absence from our child's life. I knew if I died, you'd try to rewrite the story. So I wrote it first. The page trembled in his fingers. He had to sit down. Where is the child? Henry asked, his voice cracking. Russell didn't flinch. That's privileged until the court decides next steps. But I will say this, your rights are in question. And Dr. Mikhailov is listed as guardian. Henry looked up sharply. She has my child? She had your wife's trust, Russell corrected. Thunder rumbled in the distance. Though the sky remained clear, Henry stood and closed the files slowly, breath catching in his throat. Every hallway in his house now felt like a museum of absence. Every painting, every polished surface mocked his ignorance. He had been followed by shadows. Now he was haunted by names on paper. What am I supposed to do? He asked. Russell packed his briefcase. Whatever you didn't do before, listen. As the lawyer left, Henry stood alone, Marina's letter clutched in one hand. The word unfit burned into his mind. Asterisk, it was a quiet hospital tucked into a hill outside of Chicago. Snow fell heavily that February night, muffling sirens, headlights. Even the cries from within. Alina stood beside the delivery table, her gloves trembling as she reached for the still, small body wrapped in white. The nurses said nothing. The monitor had already gone flat. No heartbeat, no breath. Only silence. Marina's scream echoed down the hallway as though it came from another world. Please, she gasped. Don't take her from me yet. Alina nodded gently and placed the baby girl into Marina's arms. The infant weighed nothing and everything. Her tiny lips slightly parted, her fists clenched in eternal sleep. Marina rocked back and forth like a woman possessed by sorrow. She never had a chance. Marina whispered, her voice hoarse, her eyes bloodshot and hollow. She didn't get even one breath, Alina finished softly, placing a hand on Marina's shoulder. I know. They stayed like that for hours. The room grew darker as the night wore on. The nurses offered water. A priest arrived, then left. No paperwork was signed. Marina refused to name the child. Eventually, the hospital administrator gently asked Alina to step in. She won't sign the release, he said. She just keeps repeating the same thing. Alina returned to Marina's side. I can help you, she whispered. But you have to let her go. Marina turned her head, finally meeting Alina's gaze. It wasn't a miscarriage, she said flatly. It was the weight of staying married to someone who couldn't see me. That line struck like a blade. Later that night, Marina slipped away from the hospital without signing the discharge papers. She left a single note for Alina. Don't tell him. He'll grieve the idea, not the child. And I can't bear to watch him make that about himself, too. Alina never heard from her again in person. But once a month, a letter would arrive typed, unsigned, always postmarked from somewhere new. They weren't updates, they were confessions. Quiet, measured outpourings of a woman unraveling and rebuilding herself in secret. I sleep with the lights on now. One read, I bought a crib I never used, said another. Eventually the letters stopped. And now, years later, Henry had come knocking with questions he never earned the right to ask. Back in the present, Alina stood in the same storage room at the care home where she'd once locked away Marina's sealed custody file. She opened a worn envelope and pulled out a photo. Marina holding a bundle wrapped in white beside Alina, neither smiling. Just present in pain. I couldn't save her body, Alina whispered to herself. So I protected her story. Behind her, someone cleared their throat. It was Henry. What did she mean? He asked quietly. When she said, The death was. Your protest? Alina didn't turn, because she died holding silence. And I'm still alive because I won't. Asterisk, the penthouse echoed with the kind of silence money couldn't fill. Henry Cole stood in the kitchen, sleeves rolled to his elbows, staring down at a pan of overcooked salmon. The edges had crisped too long ago, curling like tired pages in an old book. He hadn't cooked in years, not since Marina had begged him to learn, and he'd laughed it off, saying that's what staff is for. Tonight, the staff was gone. No Alina, no chef. No polished housekeeper moving silently behind him. Just Henry, a bottle of unopened wine, and a linen-covered table that seated 12 but fed one. He plated the salmon on Marina's favorite china, laid out napkins with the precision of ritual. At the center of the table, he placed a single candle, lit it, watched it flicker. Across from him, the seat Alina once occupied during staff dinners remained untouched. She never spoke much then, but she watched everything, eyes cataloging the temperature of the room, the tension between husband and wife, the cracks in the marble that money refused to see. Tonight, that chair haunted him. Henry sat. He tried to pray, but no words came. Instead, he whispered, "Was I really that blind?" The apartment buzzed faintly, refrigerator, air vents, the whir of a city that no longer waited for him. The news had broken days ago, leaked voice notes, sealed files unsealed. Headlines splashed with phrases like, "Widower deceived by own legacy," and "What the billionaire didn't know." He picked up his fork and began to eat. Each bite tasted like cardboard. He paused halfway through and looked across the table again. He remembered Alina quietly wiping crumbs once, and how Marina had thanked her with a touch on the arm. A moment he'd ignored. A moment now that stabbed, he thought. Of the photo she gave him, the one with the stillborn wrapped in white. A daughter who never got a name, a cry, or a place at this table. And still, he had poured himself into birthday parties, IPO celebrations, and black tie illusions, never asking what truth he had buried beneath his empire. He had lied, not just to Marina, but to himself, and now the lie sat with him, across from him. Around him, the silence at the table was no longer absence, it was indictment. He reached for his glass of wine but didn't drink. Instead, he whispered, "She was braver than I ever deserved." And as the candle flickered nearly out, he saw, maybe imagined, Marina's silhouette in the kitchen doorway, silent, watching, waiting for him to speak. Something real, but he couldn't, not yet. Asterisk, the next morning, sunlight poured through Henry's penthouse windows as if trying to cleanse what it couldn't touch. He sat in his office, staring at a blank check. His pen hovered, unmoving, above the signature line. The amount? Limitless? It didn't matter. He could have written 10 million, 100, whatever it took. It wasn't charity. It was penance. Alina stood in the doorway. Her face gave nothing. "I'm not here for apologies," she said before he could speak. Henry cleared his throat. "This isn't about that. It's a gift." He slid the check across the desk. His fingers trembled. "For your work. Your silence. For everything I didn't understand until now. She picked it up. Looked at it. Then, slowly, deliberately, tore it in half. He winced as if it had been flesh. Asterisk. "You still think this is about money?" Her voice didn't rise. It sank, cool and even. "You still believe everything has a price?" "I'm trying," he whispered. "No," she said, stepping closer, placing both halves of the check on his desk. "You're trying to buy your way out of trying." He opened his mouth, closed it. The glass wall behind her reflected his own image back at him, blurred. "Unfamiliar. I gave you truth," she continued. "And you want to tip me for it? What you didn't give to your wife, to your child? You think handing me paper undoes it?" He lowered his eyes. "I didn't know." "You didn't ask?" Her words were knives, gentle but fatal. Silence wrapped around them again. The same silence that used to cloak his dinner parties. The same silence that Marina used to cry into behind locked bathroom doors. The silence he mistook for peace. Alina turned, walked to the door. She paused, then dropped a folded piece of paper on the table. "I'm quitting," she said without looking back. "You'll find another maid, another cook, another person to ignore, but you won't find me again." Elena. She didn't stop. When she was gone, Henry opened the note. Forgiveness is not owed, especially not by the dead. The words bled into the page like a wound. He sat back, staring at the torn check. At the empty doorway, the empire he built, the lies he lived, the silence he worshipped, it all weighed nothing now. He wasn't hated. He wasn't pitied. He was seen. And for the first time in decades, Henry Cole realized that being seen was the hardest punishment of all. Henry Cole opened his eyes to silence, not the familiar hush of wealth, the kind padded by luxury carpets and automated blinds, but the kind that rang in the ears, hollow, final, sunlight filtered through half-closed curtains in his penthouse bedroom. Dust swirled like ghosts in the beams. The bedsheets beside him were untouched, smooth, cold. He rose slowly, padded barefoot across the marble floor to the mirror that stretched from wall to wall. The man who looked back was not the one from his Forbes cover. Not the keynote speaker. Not the empire builder, his hair grayed at the temples, lines carved deeper around his mouth. But it was the eyes that had changed. They no longer looked away. For years, Henry had polished this image like a weapon: confidence, control, charisma, but the cracks were no longer hiding. They were him. He pressed a hand to the glass. Across the room, his phone buzzed on the dresser. He ignored it. Instead, he walked into the kitchen, opened the refrigerator, and stared at its glaring emptiness. Just wine, just leftovers no one touched. No lists on the counter, no humming in the background. No Elena. He brewed coffee burnt, bitter, and sat alone at a table that could seat 20. The maid's chair was gone. He remembered her final note. Forgiveness is not owed, especially not by the dead. He hadn't slept since reading it. Later that morning, the New York Times headline stared up from the doorstep. Unsung hero of the war, the maid who was a doctor. Her face filled the front page, not blurred, not background, but centered, sharp. Elena Mikhailov, former trauma surgeon, now director of a nonprofit care center in Queens. A cascade of donations had arrived after the expose. Anonymous sources confirmed she'd once treated the late Marina Cole. There was no mention of Henry. He folded the paper carefully, slid it into the fireplace, watched the flames eat through his silence. He turned on the television, muted. There. She was again, speaking softly at a donation drive. Her accent still thick, her eyes steady. Children gathered around her, hands in hers, a woman who had once held the dead and dying. Now surrounded by life, the irony clawed at his throat. He turned it off and began walking room to room. His footsteps echoed through the penthouse like guilt. In his study, he closed the laptop. In the hallway, he turned off the recessed lights. One room at a time, kitchen, gym, theater, each space dimmed until the home he once flaunted became a museum of absence. Finally, he stood at the balcony. The city pulsed below. Taxi horns, dog walkers, laughter, all untouched by his downfall. He picked up a photo from the table, one of him and Marina at a gala. He remembered that night. Not the speeches, not the applause, just how tightly she held his arm. Her smile fixed but brittle. He never asked why. He never asked anything. The doorbell rang. He didn't answer. Instead, he walked back to the mirror. The man inside still stood, but he looked smaller, not from shame, not from age. From the weight of being finally known.